You are in the process of deciding whether or not to do a PhD, and you cannot decide, or you don't know which criteria that you should evaluate, then this video is for you. Deciding to do a PhD is not a light decision, so you need to consider a lot of different factors. I'll give you a guideline that is composed of 8 points that you need to think about before deciding whether or not to do a PhD. I divide these points in general into 2. The first one is the process of PhD, and the second one is what happens after the PhD. When making a decision on whether or not to do a PhD, you need to consider both whether you are going to enjoy the process, and second, whether things will be okay after you do a PhD. Because doing a PhD means a huge opportunity cost actually, because you'll be spending 3 to 6 years doing a PhD and not working in the industry usually. And this means that your opportunity cost is basically working in the industry for 3 to 6 years and gaining experience. Instead, you are doing a PhD, so you should be aware that you have some opportunity costs. So let's focus first on the process of PhD. What will be the deciders of whether or not you enjoy your PhD process depends basically on 6 points. These points are: the first, your suitability of doing a PhD. And the second one is your supervisors. Third one is university and the environment, the city that the university is in, etc. 4, the monetary aspects of PhD. 5th, suitability of a PhD degree for your life goals. And the last one is the opportunity cost. What are the options that you have that you could do instead of doing a PhD? And these are all of the factors that will affect how adamant you are in terms of doing your PhD, enjoying your PhD, and finishing your PhD. So let's look at these factors individually. First, your suitability of doing a PhD. So how is your character suits? Does your personality allows you to be comfortable with doing a PhD? This means the PhD work usually have some characteristics. For example, you are based in a university, so do you like the university environment and do you like studying? That is one of the things that you need to think about. The other one is that PhD is usually a solitary work. Yes, you do have collaborators, but most of the time you spend your time working by yourself. Sometimes, you go consult to your supervisors or colleagues about stuff, but most of the time the work is solitary. So if you like, for example, working in the teams rather than working by yourself, then PhD might not be a great option for you, but it depends. It's something that you need to decide. The other thing to consider within this title is that, do you like taking a deep dive into one topic for a long time? So the thing is, in academia, works are usually take 2 to 3 years. So even more actually sometimes. There are some papers that the authors worked on 8 to 10 years, for example. So if you don't like taking such a long time on one particular topic, then PhD might not be a good idea for you. If you like fast changing subjects and projects, I don't think academia is that type of a place where you can work on different stuff back to back. Of course, you can have like a couple of projects and you can divide your time between those, but still, usually studies will take at least a couple of years and you will have to spend your time on this one particular subject for at least a couple of years, and you will have to gain a lot of expertise in it. And in my opinion, you need to love at least 50% of what your PhD would involve For example, most PhDs, mostly doing a PhD involves getting some data if you are working in an empirical environment, which is what I do. For example, I need to get data, I need to clean and organize that data, and then I need to make analysis on these data using statistical tools, and then I need to make sense of the results, and then I need to put these into writing, of course knowing a lot about the literature that is relevant to my project. So these are, for example, the components of the PhD might change from PhD to PhD. For example, there are like qualitative research. They don't really get like big data sets. They work on stories, etc. To be honest, I don't know much about. But usually, if you are working in an empirical project, this is what you do. And this means that if you like, for example, dealing with data and gaining expertise in one particular or couple of different literature streams, writing, so you need to at least like the majority of the components. For example, for me, writing is not my favorite part, but I like dealing with the data, doing analyses and trying to make sense of these analyses are my favorite parts. And the thing is, for example, you also need to do presentations, which I am okay with, actually. And another component in most PhDs is teaching. Either you are teaching tutorials or something, or you are just assisting a professor in their classes. So would you like these type of tasks? So I advise you check out people who have done PhDs in the area that you're interested in and ask them, so what do you do on a daily basis, or like what do you do in a weekly basis? And this can give you an idea of what are the components of doing a PhD. Yes, and at the end you have to produce a written document, but writing and reading is not the only parts that PhD candidates do. Another factor to think about, is there a subject that you would really enjoy studying? For example, in empirical work, where you basically get data and do analysis on them and try to make some sort of a conclusion and recommendation out of this, you usually work within a context. For example, for me, the context is streaming and music. And I like learning about this, and I actually listen to podcasts and about these subjects, and also I do read about them. I enjoy reading about them. So you do need to have some sort of a enjoyment, because otherwise it wouldn't be bearable. So you should have some sort of an idea of like what type of subject you will be interested in. So is it like digital media, for example, society, I don't know, retail? I'm just giving examples from marketing, because that's where I'm doing my PhD. But there are lots of areas that you could be interested in. For example, experimental, if you're into economics, experimental economics, or like behavioral economics, etc. So is there something that you, for example, read a paper on and you were like, wow, it would be kind of cool to write a paper like this, or work on a paper like this? So these are the evaluations that you need to do by yourself. You need to ask yourself, so are there any components that I like doing that is involved in doing a PhD? Is there a subject that I am passionate about, etc.? But to understand a bit more, you might be thinking yourself, yes, I do like this, I want to do this, etc. But it is always a good idea to ask people around you what they think about you doing a PhD. For example, do they think you would be like a good candidate? The thing is, that's not have to be decisive. For example, when I was talking to some professors of mine, they weren't looking really warm on. They weren't really positive about me doing a PhD, but some were really positive. So it's not always the case that they have the right hunch, but it is good to know what they think and to listen to, for example, ask your professors about, I'm thinking of doing a PhD in this area, what would you think about me doing this, etc. So you can get their input, and at the least beforehand, before applying. And to see whether actually you really like it. So you might say, oh yeah, I like doing this, doing that. But the thing is, if you want to understand that you will be suitable for doing a PhD, well, the best option is to write a thesis, for example, either at the end of your bachelor's or going for a master's, especially the ones that are intended towards future PhD students, and doing the coursework, doing the thesis, and ask yourself whether you are enjoying the process and whether you want to do more of this. Because for example, I had friends who came to research masters, so that's basically what you do before a PhD, and they realized, no, even though I enjoyed this process, I don't want to do, for example, this any longer, so I will move to industry and I will do that. So a good test, you would enjoy the process, is to already do this in a smaller scale, like a bachelor's thesis or master's thesis. Okay, these were the points about your personal suitability to doing a PhD. But there are other factors that will definitely affect your PhD process. For example, one of them is your supervisors. Choosing a right supervisor, or like having someone that you are interested in their work, and these people, it's really better if these people are nice. So this will definitely affect your PhD process. So this is also something to think about before doing a PhD, like what type of supervisor you would want to have and whether they're available. Another factor that will be important in your PhD process and your enjoyment from the PhD process is the university that you choose. So what will be your options if you were to do a PhD? What will be your options in terms of the universities? Of course, there are some facts. For example, very good universities usually have really high requirements, and there are some universities that are still good and they still have plenty of requirements. So the thing is, if your university environment is not nice and it's not nurturing and it's not so much fun, for example, you are going to a university and there are not so many international students, that will make things a lot tougher for you. So you also need to think about your university choices, and are there any good choices that you would be okay with spending next 3 to 6 years there. So that is another important thing to consider. What you can do about this is that, well, you can try to visit the university and the city, the country that this university is in. But if that's not feasible for you, it wasn't feasible for me, what you can do is contact the students who have already done their PhDs or masters there and try to get information from there. So it is definitely recommended that you do this, because you really get good tips and you really get a good view of what's behind the scenes, basically. Also, I will try to actually choose universities that have the same values and same systems as your bachelor degree university, or like one of the universities that you have studied in. I think that will make things a lot easier for you if you go somewhere that has some sort of systems in place, so you don't have to learn everything all over again, and you can navigate the university environment much easily. Of course, another important aspect of whether you're going to enjoy your PhD process is the money. So the thing is, I will definitely recommend doing a fully funded PhD. Most of the time, the university or some sort of an outside grant giver provides funding for your PhD, however long it is. So having that financial support is really important. For example, I know there are some PhD programs that require that you pay tuition, which is, for me, is a bit ridiculous. So why would you pay for PhD, because you will be sort of working for the university, but they are making you pay for it. So that could be, I imagine, really difficult. So I would suggest you get a fully funded PhD that is enough for you to support yourself and to live off of. Next thing to consider is whether a PhD is suitable for your life goals. So what is your life goal? Is it to be an academician, for example, to work in the academia as a professor? Then yeah, PhD is clearly the option, clearly the thing for you to do. But for example, if you just want to go on a managerial position, if that is your ultimate goal, a PhD might not be the best option for you, because, for example, for managerial positions, more than having a PhD experience, it is more valuable to have industry experience. So you need to consider, what is my life goal? How does a PhD fit in this? Another important factor is the outside options and how attracted you are to them. So if you're really in between doing a PhD or taking a job in the industry, I think this might make the process of PhD a bit more difficult. So you really need to consider this carefully. For me, it was a clear decision. I had no doubts in my mind that PhD was the best thing for me and the thing that I wanted to do most. And having that type of, I think, thinking really helps you not have any doubts about spending this, I don't know, 3 to 6 years on something that might be sometimes considered obscure, for example, or maybe not so practical sometimes, because you are really having a deep dive into this. And I know that some PhDs sometimes start to question their motives and what they're doing during the PhD process, because they haven't taken the time to consider whether PhD is the best thing for them to do and it's the best suiting. And we come to the very next big umbrella of factors. That is what happens after your PhD. So the thing is, you want to have a job, I assume, after your PhD. So some people think that having a PhD is always good, but that is not the case. I've heard quite a lot of stories, maybe stuff that I read on the internet, but I think this is pretty true. Having a PhD sometimes makes you overqualified, and that means, for example, the hiring person will have to pay a lot of money as your salary to you, but they don't want to do that because, for example, they think you lack industry experience. It is not all employers think that having an employee having a PhD or employee candidate having a PhD is a very good thing. So you really need to think about what your options after graduating from your PhD and what are the job options both in academia and outside of academia. Even if your intention is to go to the academia, it is still good to think about, does having your PhD will make you still employable? So the thing is, I think the employability is higher on the more quantitative side and more business type of PhDs, but that employability probably, I don't have like a concrete source on this, but it is, we can think it is the probability, the employability is way lower on the very, very social and very, very qualitative type of PhDs. For example, I don't know, ancient texts, for example, you have really limited choices and you cannot. Anyway, so you have to think about your employability in industry. And of course, before that, you also need to think about what is the competition in your field for the academic jobs. Usually, the academic jobs are really competitive. If you think about it, For example, every department, let's say 10 students, 10 PhD candidates graduate, so they have their PhD, but probably this university doesn't open 10 positions for the assistant profs. They open probably 1 to 2. Of course, the students who are graduating, maybe half of them will not want to continue in academia. That's one thing to take into account. But still, you'll have like 1 to 2 position opening for 5 or even more graduating students. I have like, these numbers are completely made up, but it's something like that. So that is why academic jobs are usually very competitive, and you'll need to keep that in mind. Most of the time, for example, people cannot find a job, an academic job in the country they want, so they have to apply to jobs in different countries even, which is, yeah, a kind of a good thing and bad thing at the same time. If you don't want to leave the place that you are living, obviously having to apply to other countries is a bad thing for you. But of course, academic jobs have a great international mobility if you can get a job. So it is really important to think about your employability prospects after your PhD, because you don't want to spend your 3 to 6 years or even more actually in your PhD. Even if you have enjoyed, I think if you don't have much of a job prospect after it, that might not be the best place to be. So you really need to investigate the employment options for your PhD. One way to gauge whether or not the PhD that you're thinking of has good opportunities is to look at the people who have graduated, who have already done their PhDs in the area that you are interested in, and what sort of jobs they got, right? You might even try to contact them and ask them, so how was the job finding process after your PhD? What were the difficulties that you had? What was the advice that you would give? So you can check LinkedIn, for example, or usually schools have alumni pages and they kind of show where their alumni went. So check those out. All right, folks, I hope this was informative. Let me give you a small summary of this. A summary is always small, but anyway. You need to think about both process of the PhD and after PhD in order to make a right decision in terms of doing a PhD or not. You don't want to come to like I'm adding and after PhD, because after PhD thoughts will already start to be like in your mind when you have like 2 years left in your PhD or something. So it's not going to be like after 4 years you're going to suddenly think about PhD. What are anyway, to gauge whether you will enjoy the process of PhD, you need to consider your personal suitability to your PhD. And then you need to think whether you have some supervisors that you want to work with, some nice people, hopefully. Another one is what type of universities that you have chances at getting into, and whether you would like those universities, cities, and countries. And the important thing is that whether you have good funding that will allow you to maintain your life, I think. The suitability of a PhD degree for your life goals, and what are your options, and what is your thoughts about your other options. And for after PhD, you need to think about what are your options after PhD, and how is the competition and employability for the PhD that you're going for. That was the summary. Thanks for listening. I hope this helped. Please leave any questions that you have below. See you next time.